Thanks so much to everyone who has decided to join us this evening as we talk about the path forward to abortion rights. This evening we have with us a really interesting panel. Can't wait to jump into the discussion, but I would be remiss if I did not allow everyone to introduce themselves. So starting with myself, the moderator, my name is Deborah Woolen. I am the recording secretary for the Fairfax County Democratic Committee and also the vice chair of the State and Local Affairs Committee, who is hosting this really important event. So I am now going to pass it over to Senator Boysko of the 33rd District. Just so everyone knows, we're super thankful that Senator Boysko is with us as she's just getting over COVID. So she's going to be utilizing her voice as much as she can, but we're going to give her a lot of grace when it comes to talking. So please, Senator, if you want to share the audience about yourself and your background, et cetera.
Hi there, everybody. It's so nice to be with you tonight. I'm Jennifer Boysko. I'm in the Senate, currently in the 33rd District, which is parts of Fairfax and Loudoun counties. In the 2023 elections, I will be running for the 38th District, which is Herndon, Reston, McLean, Great Falls, and Wolf Trap. I am a former member of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. I serve on a national state innovation exchange reproductive rights work group as well. This has been something that I have really cared about since I was a young woman in college back in the 1980s. And I'm just happy that we're having this conversation because we got a lot of work to protect our rights here in Virginia. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Thanks so much, Senator. Okay. Jamie Lockhart, the Executive Director for Planned Parenthood Virginia.
Thank you, Deborah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Lockhart. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia. We are the C4 social welfare organization for Planned Parenthood here in the Commonwealth, and I work with 3 different Planned Parenthood affiliates, the closest to this area being Planned Parenthood Metro Washington, D.C., and I've been with the organization for about 3 years. I'm excited to talk tonight about what's at stake for abortion rights here in Virginia and across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And Lisa Sales, President of the Virginia chapter of the National Organization for Women.
Thanks, Deborah. Hi, everyone. I'm certainly happy to be here. As Deborah said, I'm the President of Virginia Now. I also serve on the ERA Coalition Advisory Council, and I'm on the policy committee for the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. So I'm happy to bring that flavor to tonight's conversation. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. So again, thank you all so much for being with us. So let's just jump right in. Gosh, the Dobbs decision. How did we even get here? How did we get to this place? So Jamie, I'm going to punt that over to you, then Lisa to you, and then Senator, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you. So on June 24th of this year, the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision overturned Roe v. Wade, and a 6-3 decision upheld Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban. So with that decision overturning the constitutional right to safe legal abortion and sending the decision of the right to abortions back to the state level, and kind of how we got here, really rest on the Supreme Court, but it was decades of work by those against abortion rights, setting up the conditions to have this conservative Supreme Court, and then setting up the conditions in states to where we are now with so many states having banned abortion care. But I think we knew this was always a possibility. And then when Trump had those 3 appointments to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the balance flipped to having what was previously a 5-4 kind of majority in support of abortion rights to then a 6-3 majority opposed to abortion rights is how we ended up getting that decision in June.
Yeah, I know a lot of us are just like, are you kidding me? Did we think this day would actually come? Are we living The Handmaid's Tale? Lisa, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that a very privileged, wealthy class of folks are deciding for low-income Black and brown women their fate, right? And taking away their reproductive planning choices. And I don't really believe that they care about abortion one way or another. I think it's a wedge issue. And I think it's something that they can run on and politicize. And it's really not about each of us individual women. We have to be the backlash. We have to fight. So, yeah, and it's concerning. It's disturbing and it's concerning.
Absolutely. And then from a policy perspective, Senator, what are your thoughts on just how we got to this place?
Well, you know, as Jamie and Lisa have said, folks have been working on this for decades. Trump being able to put people in the Supreme Court from states where there are, you know, smaller populations than some of our, you know, biggest cities. It's not equal representation. But what I want people who are watching this to know right now, that in Virginia, even though the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade, abortion is still safe and legal here in Virginia. So abortion is legal in the first and second trimesters here. We have 15 abortion clinics here in Virginia, including the 6 Planned Parenthood centers. They are open and they are providing abortion care to people who need services. And then abortion care in early pregnancy is available through mail order abortion pills in conjunction with virtual telehealth appointments. So people need to know that we have set in place protections for people who need abortion care right now. What we're going to have to be worried about is what's going to happen in the future. Our elections in 2023 are going to make major decisions about that, and we all need to be vigilant. I'm looking forward to the conversations with you all tonight, you know, to delve into this a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. So absolutely, abortion care is, you know, at risk and all over the country. But what else? When it comes to the umbrella of reproductive rights, like what else is at risk? Lisa?
So I always take the angle and the concern that femicide is a big issue in this country with, you know, pregnant women often end up dead by their partners. And this is only going to increase violence against women in this country. And so, you know, men tend to injure, maim their partners. And I fear that rates of death are going to go up during pregnancy when women are forced to carry children and when they're at their most vulnerable. And so I think that's, you know, like Senator Boysko said, we have to get out the vote. We have to continue to work hard because literally our lives are on the line. And so that means getting out what I call the equality vote. And those, you know, we have to elect equality so that we can have family-friendly policies and policies that look out for women and children and safeguard our decisions.
Absolutely. Jamie, when all of this happened from an activist perspective, like what were some of the roadblocks that were immediately put up that you all had to kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say scramble, but mitigate when this decision was made?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about a couple different things. One, just what I want to emphasize what Senator Boysko just said, which is that abortion remains legal here in Virginia. And one of the main obstacles when any decision like this comes down is just misinformation and confusion. We know that people don't know what their rights are because they see the national news. And we have such a patchwork of access now across the country. There are 17 states where there are abortion bans in effect today. And those bans vary widely from total abortion bans to 6-week bans to some 15-week bans. And so it can be very confusing for patients and people needing access to care to know what is available to them in their states. So I think that is one barrier, is just making sure people know they have access to care. And then the other being It's created a healthcare crisis for people to need to travel to access care. Also, the question you just asked, Lisa, about kind of other consequences of this, we've seen now where people aren't getting access to birth control in Idaho. We see cases where people are not getting access to methotrexate, an arthritis drug. We see instances where people are going to pharmacies for prescriptions for miscarriage management, and those are being denied because it's the same prescriptions that people use for medication abortions. And so we know that this confusion is part of what those that are against abortion have wanted to create. We know that a lot of this is intentional, but there are a lot of consequences for all different people. I mean, mostly for people seeking, reproductive health care and abortion care, but we also know that this impacts people in all different situations, whether it's getting access to contraceptives, other medications, miscarriage management. I was being interviewed by a student today, and she was asking me about what does this mean to you personally. And I was thinking about, as someone who's of reproductive age that hopes to be pregnant again one day, also being worried about if I become pregnant and am in Florida or another state that has kind of confusing abortion restrictions, and in a situation where I need emergency care or need to end a pregnancy, even if that's a very wanted pregnancy. Now we've created this confusion around what is acceptable. And so I think anybody who can become pregnant, or anybody who loves someone that can become pregnant, should be concerned about the state of America today and access to reproductive health care.
Absolutely. Senator Boysko, Glenn Youngkin has proposed banning abortion as early as 15 weeks. What does the legislative landscape currently look like?
Thank you, Deborah. You may have heard the term the Senate brick wall. I will tell everybody here that we have made a firm commitment that we will not accept a 15-week ban or any other one. I will be fighting alongside my colleagues in the Senate to preserve our right to make decisions for ourselves, to protect our healthcare workers from being prosecuted for criminal actions when they're just trying to serve the community who needs healthcare based on best practices. And we will continue that fight. I think it's important to understand that during the last special session, Governor Youngkin tried also to put language in the budget that would have hurt our most vulnerable individuals who are dealing with serious fetal anomalies and other, unviable pregnancies in a later part of their term. And we were able to kill that bill because we know that nobody goes into that without a dire consequence for themselves. I will tell you personally, as a mother of two daughters, when my youngest daughter was born, I got one of those really very serious pregnancy-related diseases where the doctor was telling me that either I would have to have the baby or die. Most of the people who are making these kinds of decisions have never been put in that situation. They have no idea what the risks are to women and families. And it is just pure politics, as has been said on this earlier. But again, I tell you, the brick wall in the Virginia Senate is not going to have it. And the public doesn't want it. 1 in 4 women in Virginia have had abortions. This is something that Republicans and Democrats alike support, and they are playing with fire. And we're going to stand up against it.
Do you expect him to try to restrict abortions even further?
Yeah, I mean, we know that a couple of members of the General Assembly are looking at trying to do complete bans. We will see things around birth control. We will see, I know that the governor has been working with a handful of legislators in the House and the Senate to put the 15-week ban back in. I think we'll see a lot of anti-personal freedom bills coming forward that would restrict our right to make decisions for ourselves. And please, everybody, understand that the criminal code is where our abortion policy lies. So if you actually break one of the laws, you can be criminally punished. We've got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the key word that Senator, you just mentioned, and Jamie, you mentioned it, and Lisa, you mentioned it as well, is the criminalization. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about why criminalization is not the solution. I was looking up earlier, I think it's in Louisiana, that governor or one of their legislators put into, I think it's like House Bill 1315, that would charge someone with murder, essentially, for having an abortion. But as you mentioned, Senator, there's this perception by those who have no purview, men, conservative, who don't have a uterus, that are making these decisions. And they have this perspective that for a woman to get to a place where she has to make this decision is flippant. And there isn't a lot of thought that's put into it. And so it's easy for them to say, well, criminalization is the solution. Let's talk about why criminalization is not the solution. Lisa?
So, this is a real equity issue. And women are already on the pointy end of the spear for everything. And so we arguably, we have the most degrees in the nation, college degrees. We also have the most student debt, right? And we're paid the least. And now we're going to criminalize women who, more often than not, no one wants to have an abortion, right? That's a very hard decision for a woman to make. So to now put that woman and her family in a position where she could go to jail or she could be charged is abhorrent. To be put in that situation where you might have two young children at home or, school-age children at home. Now you're going to pull that mother away from her children because abortion has been criminalized and she's going to have to pay the penalties. And then what's that going to do to her job, right? What are the impacts to the workforce going to be? And I think those are all things we need to be very concerned about and vigilant about, because we are razor thin in our House of Delegates and razor thin in our Senate, and we need to prevent that from happening.
Absolutely. Jamie, so when talking about criminalization, I know that Planned Parenthood, there's a lot of research. Planned Parenthood collects a lot of data. What does criminalization look like from a demographics perspective? And why should we, pointedly, I guess my question is, marginalized communities, Black women, what does criminalization of abortion look like as far as impacting marginalized communities?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. It's so important. I think, first off, abortion is healthcare. And so, the fact that you would criminalize reproductive health care is outrageous. But as you just alluded to, we know which bodies in America are over-policed. We know that that Black and Brown people have always been over-policed in this country, and that when abortion is criminalized, we know who is most impacted, which are Black and Brown individuals, low-income people, LGBTQ folks, immigrant communities. And we've seen this play out. We've seen this play out in Texas. We're seeing this play out now in other states. We also know that, whether it's, abortion being banned in states or, folks presenting for miscarriages, we know that when folks go to a hospital for miscarriage management and treatment, that it is low-income folks who are disproportionately Black and Brown, who nurses and doctors believe were there because they caused an abortion versus had a miscarriage. And so we just know that there's a different level of trust in our country. And so when you criminalize healthcare, just like if you look at criminalization of other things like drugs and other stuff, just who is disproportionately caught up in the criminal justice system. And so, there's lots of reasons why abortion should be decriminalized. But certainly the disproportionate treatment of some Americans should be a top reason why we make sure that it remains healthcare that's not criminalized.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. We do have a question in the chat. Ben Zul said he wanted to ask the panel, and I think this would be a great question for the senator, if there are any old Virginia laws that were never repealed but were annulled while Roe was the law of the land, that after Dobbs could affect access to abortion here.
Yeah, we've done a lot. Thanks for the question, Ben. Yeah, we've done a lot of work in Virginia over the past few years when the Senate had a pro-choice majority and the House had a pro-choice majority. So the Reproductive Freedom Act, I'm sorry, my voice is just,
Okay.
isn't it? The Reproductive Health Protection Act removed many of the barriers to abortion. So like the requirement to have the transvaginal ultrasound was repealed. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of struggling here. The waiting period, we allow now more people to provide abortion care than previously, although we still need to do more work. We have stopped people from having biased counseling, so those and mandatory waiting periods. Senator McClellan carried a bill that many of us co-sponsored last year. I think it was in 2021 that repealed some of the restrictions on abortion care that have made it more accessible. We also have expanded access to birth control. Now Medicaid patients can get a full year of birth control pills at one time. If we are allowing abortion care in our health exchange plan as well.
Thank you, Senator. Jamie, were you going to jump in? It's okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to what the senator said, Ben, your question, which is, I guess somewhat good news is that Virginia didn't have any sort of trigger law or anything like many other states did. There were about a dozen states that had laws on the books that basically were put in place either pre-Roe or post the decision so that they would have an abortion ban if the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So, fortunately, we didn't have an old statute, and we're seeing now, it's really ridiculous, just outrageous how in Wisconsin and Arizona, they're enforcing these laws from the 1800s to ban abortion right now. So there are a lot of those old laws across the country that states are having to contend with right now. But as has been mentioned, our abortion lives in our criminal code. So there are just, really harmful pieces there. And if we were to have some sort of abortion ban, I think we also have language in our code around self-managed abortion that would also be very harmful, based on other things that are not currently enforced that are very harmful, but luckily not a kind of trigger ban or these really arcane laws that are being enforced now in other states.
Wow. Thank you, Jamie. I think that's a perfect segue into, Elisa, I saw that you're unmuted. Were you going to add to that or no? No, okay.
No, go ahead.
But I think this is a perfect segue, sure, into a question for you, Lisa. So what is the role of activists on abortion? What do you think is the most effective thing that we can do as citizens, not only to prevent our rights from being further eroded, but to go on the offensive to protect the right to an abortion?
So I think we have to message how we can actually save Roe and save abortion. And I think for that, we need constitutional protections. We need constitutional protections at the state level, and we need constitutional protections at the federal level. It's a lot harder. Jamie spoke about these patchwork laws. It's a lot harder to roll back constitutional amendments than it is to roll back laws, state laws that are subject to a legislator's whim. And I think one of the solutions to that maybe people don't know about, that's that we're actually seeing work its way through states right now, is the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't think people actually get that the Equal Rights Amendment can undergird Roe. Some think it's this dusty old 70s relic, but it's modern and it's for today. And in the wake of Dobbs, it's getting more and more attention because ERA is about prohibiting discrimination based on sex. And what you're doing is you're taking vital health care away from one gender, right? By definition, that's sex discrimination. And I'll give you some further examples. I'm cheating here and looking at my little list. But New York State, for example, has a constitutional amendment on the ballot, an equal rights amendment that they are expanding to include more inclusive language around gender discrimination, gender expression, gender identity, ethnicity, et cetera. And so I think that's something we might consider going. But honestly, states like Utah, and here's where I'm cheating, and thankful for Planned Parenthood and Whole Woman's Health, they argued successfully on 2 occasions, right, that the Equal Rights Amendment provisions in the Utah Constitution prohibit the abortion ban triggered by Dobbs. That's also happened in New Mexico, and similarly in Alaska and Arizona, with a pending case also before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And so I think we can look to these other states like Utah and New Mexico and Connecticut and Alaska and Arizona, right, for examples on how we might move out, because that can really help save Roe and undergird our rights.
So if we don't do anything, if we just so remember when the decision was first made, there was a lot of language around like, we said this was going to happen. We saw the signs, but we just didn't do enough. If we continue to just kind of hope the next person will do it, or, I don't need to be the one to make the phone call. I don't need to be the one, to do the research. I don't need to be the one to do the marching. What's at risk? What does the next 20 years possibly look like for women?
So I'll just to answer it. I don't think I answered it at all. Maybe the activist or advocacy question, which is we were just on the phone with Leader Schumer's office in Congress. And the leader's office said, you're not making enough noise. We're not hearing enough from advocates, whether it's equal rights or abortion, we need to hear more. And so lifting our voices and lifting the voices of others that maybe can't get away from work, to march, to make the calls, to text, to vote, to register to vote, to get others to register to vote. It's incumbent on all of us, I think, to message, to use our voices in any way that we can, whether it's giving testimony and telling stories about our lived experiences, whether it's meeting with lawmakers to tell them how we're feeling and what we're experiencing in the community, or what our friends and family members are experiencing, and helping others give voice where maybe they're too shy to step back. That's incumbent upon us as advocates to really lift others up and to get out there and be seen and be heard and to not let up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. Jamie, were you going to say something?
Yes. And can you repeat your question that you just asked on this?
Sure. From an activist perspective, like what does the next, if we don't do something, if we just kind of like stay asleep, what does the next 20 years look like?
Yes. And I'm glad you phrased it in the next 20 years, because I think one of the challenges with what we're facing is that there's not any quick fix. I really wish there was, but I think this is going to have to be a voting in every election, making our voice heard every year until rights are protected. And I see the question that Nora also put in the chat there, which it says, since we've seen the right to an abortion devolve to be under the purview of the states, it feels like our rights are very tied to our political fortunes and who controls the state, House, Senate, governorship. Is there a way for us to protect abortion rights on a more permanent basis for years to come? And I think kind of along with the lines of what you just asked and what Nora asked, it is incumbent upon us to really fight to put abortion rights and equal rights into our state constitution. That's really the way to make sure it's not based on the political whims of who's in the legislature and who's governor. And, you know, we have changes every 2 years because of the House of Delegates elections. But in Virginia, that's a long process. So to get a constitutional amendment through in Virginia, you have to have it pass the House and Senate twice with an intervening election. So the earliest that we would potentially see a constitution, and then it goes to the voters. So the earliest that we would potentially see a reproductive freedom or equal rights style amendment here in Virginia is 2026, because it would have to pass, well, we have a House of Delegates that would not entertain something like that, unfortunately, but, you know, we're still going to try. But if it was able to pass the House and the Senate, the earliest would be 2024/2025. Then there's the election, November 2025. You could bring it up again, assuming you have majorities in both bodies, 2026, and then it would go to the voters November 2026. So it's a long process, and I think all of us are going to have to be in here for the long haul. And we know that those that are against abortion spent, 50 years. Nearly 50 years to get to the point where Roe v. Wade was overturned. And it's going to take just as long for us to be able to really get back and make sure we have, hopefully not that long, but to really fight back to get access. And I think that's going to be a combination of winning state elections and making state changes, hopefully getting to a point where we can pass something like the Women's Health Protection Act at the federal level go into effect. But then also it might take some direct democracy, like a federal constitutional amendment or, constitutional amendments in a lot of states, because we know that people are with us. But we have legislatures that are gerrymandered and, people and voting rights under attack. So, but, taking that vote directly to the people, like we just saw in Kansas.
Thank you, Jamie. I have a really good question in the Q&A from Judith, and I do want to pose that. But Senator, I want to see if you, go ahead.
I did. So one thing that I think is important is, first, there is an election on November the 8th in just a month. And you already saw that, many of you know that at the federal level, an abortion ban was proposed in the Senate. And so it's imperative that you get everybody to go out and vote in this election. And then we are having redistricting. So all of us in the General Assembly are running in brand new districts. I'm only keeping 7 precincts, for instance. So it's very, very important that people stay engaged and work really hard over the next year and a half as we are looking for the 2023 elections. You can be assured that we will be carrying a constitutional amendment to protect abortion. As Jamie said, there's no way we're going to be able to pass it in this House of Delegates. However, we need to continue messaging that we are not going anywhere, that we're going to be the brick wall, that we're not going to let things get rolled back. And you need to be reaching out to all of your legislators around the state to express your concerns. You need to use your voice. You need to write letters to the editor. You need to do op-eds. You need to make sure that it's not just on social media, but you're setting up appointments to speak to people, to show up, to speak at our hearings when we are hearing these bills, to testify. Because if we do not have the public support, then we're going to have a hard time. But we know that we do have the public support. And, the recent poll came out and said 88% of Virginians believe that people should have access to abortion care. we need to drive that home with our Republican colleagues. They know it. They're terrified that this is actually going to happen because they don't want it. Some of them don't want it either, but the political winds are fighting this, and they are on the hot seat, and they're going to have to vote for it. And we cannot let that happen.
Yes, thank you so much, Senator. Super important. Jamie, and forgive me if I mispronounce your last name. Sorry, not Jamie. Judith Shamer has a really interesting question. She says, talk about one specific religious view about abortion being imposed on all people as a violation of the constitutional rights to freedom of religion and explicitly opposing a state religion. So abortion, or the right to abortion, is super sensitive, right? And it definitely divides religious communities. One thing that I often say is that no matter where you stand morally, I hope people understand that criminalizing or victimizing someone for making a decision based upon their own state of desperation, there's no morality in that. Hopefully we can all agree with that. So just from that perspective, let's examine that a bit. I'll read it again. She said, talk about one specific religious view about abortion being imposed on all people as a violation of the constitutional rights to freedom of religion and explicitly opposing a state religion. Jamie.
Yeah, I just want to say amen to that. I mean, it is the case that people have all different views on abortion and pregnancy, and we are in a place where a lot of folks who are arguing a Christian evangelical view should be kind of what the government has decided. And I'm Jewish, and people of Jewish faith are supportive of abortion rights and have different views around kind of when life begins, and that's something that varies a lot based on people's religion and thoughts around science. So I think also I don't need to get into all the different faiths, but we have seen a lot of religious leaders speak out since the Supreme Court decision came out in Virginia and across the country on, I think that there's a lot of thinking that people who are religious are against abortion, and that's not the case. We know that Catholics are having abortions at similar rates as, people of all different faiths, and that it's, pretty just, people of all faiths accessing this reproductive health care. One of the things that will be interesting is some of the challenges based on religious grounds. There's a synagogue in Florida that put a challenge to Florida's abortion ban from a religious standpoint. And because we had Roe v. Wade for nearly 49 years, that is what people used. They used that basis of privacy when they were challenging different abortion restrictions. But we're in a new world now where we don't have that constitutional protection. So I anticipate we will see challenges on religious grounds and freedom of religion, and the fact that, Christian views around abortion are being imposed on a lot of Americans right now.
Absolutely. Lisa?
I'm getting kisses from my dog right at this moment.
I understand.
No, I don't really have a lot to add to what Jamie said, because we're of the same faith and so of the same belief system about when life starts. But regardless of faith, it's really up to each individual's faith, right, and belief in themselves. And so again, I don't have a lot to add from a religious perspective, other than the fact that I hope we see these challenges based on religious grounds in terms of, in favor of choice. We'll have to see, where this goes. Again, this patchwork legislation across the country is just going to add, and then the layer of religion on top is just going to add so much confusion, which is just another reason why, the federal government shouldn't be making decisions, or the state government should not be making decisions for a woman or a pregnant person, period, the end, full stop.
Absolutely. I think it just goes back to, again, there is no, when you think about, so I was doing some research, and to Jamie's point, there are religious organizations that agree that criminalizing this is not the solution, especially if you give someone a criminal record, that affects their access to education, higher education. That affects their access to employment. That's not just at all. So many of us can agree that there is no justice, there is no moral standard that can be found in criminalizing someone's need to, someone mentioned it earlier, to healthcare. This is essentially a healthcare crisis. I have another question from Eliza De La Bordi, who's also part of State and Local Affairs Committee. She said, are there any important messages or framing around this issue that are particularly effective with voters? How should we be talking about this issue with friends and community members? Senator, how's your voice?
I can say that this is a freedom issue, right? Like, we should be able to make decisions for ourselves. And just to go back on the religious thing, I'm the daughter of an Episcopal priest. I studied Christian and Jewish theology for 5 years in my 30s. And it is not just a Christian priest, statement that abortion is not acceptable. That is not my theology. And when I've carried bills on that, I always talk about my personal religious beliefs, because religious freedom was born in Virginia. As far as messaging, we should, when a person makes a decision to have an abortion, the majority of Virginians want that person to have a safe and healthy and outcome, right? They want her to be able to be safe. What we're doing by criminalizing folks, threatening to throw them in jail, taking away their decisions to have a safe and healthy health care procedure, is not in the public's eye something that they support. And it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans, it's independents. I've spoken to spouses and daughters of Republicans who are going to go out and vote this year, and before had not really cared about it. This is a freedom issue, and people care about personal decision making and not having somebody else infringe on their rights to make decisions for themselves. I think that's where we should focus our attention and our messaging.
Absolutely, thank you. Jamie, when it comes to us having these discussions with our friends and our family, and within my circle, most of my friends are beyond childbearing years, or they have children of their own. So this might not necessarily be on their radar, but it's still important for our neighbors. So how should we be addressing this?
Yeah, and I think just to build off what Senator Boysko just said, two things. One, to emphasize that this is a decision between a pregnant person with their family, their medical professionals, and perhaps their faith leaders if they subscribe to a faith, not a decision for the government. And so really asking the question of whose decision is this? And then I think also to emphasize what Senator Boysko just said around, if someone that you love, like if a child or friend was in a position where they had made the decision to end a pregnancy, would you want them to have the support and care that they needed? Or would you want them to have to, travel hundreds of miles and face obstacles to get access to that healthcare? And so I think, framing it in a, like, whose decision is it to make? Should it be the pregnant person's decision to make, or should it be, an arbitrary decision by the government of kind of when someone should have access to that care? And then also, wanting somebody you love to be able to access care without all those obstacles, being able to get an abortion as soon as they want one, versus having to have a mandatory waiting period to travel, to, have to wait a long time because they've closed down health centers and there's not many options left. So I think talking about it in both that, like, whose decision is it to be made, but also of, if it was someone you loved, how would you want them to be treated?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. So with our 13 minutes left, we're going to wrap up. So, and folks that are listening, if you have questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat or in actually in the Q&A, so you can make sure that your question is received and answered. But as we wrap up, what are just some thoughts that, and Lisa, I'll start with you, you want folks to leave with, and some actionable information?
Yeah, so I second what Senator Boysko said, which is they have to be vocal. They have to make appointments with their legislators. Start now, because once GA rolls around, General Assembly rolls around, it's very fast moving and people don't have time to necessarily sit and hear your stories. And now's a really good time to remind legislators on both sides of the aisle what we're seeing happen in other states, and that we want Virginia to make, to continue to be a safe haven for others. And also that we have, half the states in the union by the time that we're done could have abortion bans. And that's going to be an undue pressure, right, on Virginia to provide services to those women and pregnant people. And I think we really have to be vigilant and stay on message. And again, use our advocacy, use our voices to really be clear that women and pregnant people are in danger. We see women now being sent home, right, from the hospital, hemorrhaging. That's not acceptable. I don't know how we can live with ourselves, or how some can live with themselves, thinking that they are putting an adult human being who's fully viable, who's out in the workforce contributing to society, put that woman or pregnant person's life at risk for an unborn child that that maybe even has a deformity or is not viable anyhow. Why would you send that woman or pregnant person home to bleed out? That just, it's unconscionable to me. And so I think folks really need to get active and realize that even if you don't have a uterus anymore, or you are, someone that was never able to give birth, that it's incumbent on all of us to lift our voices and fight for one another in this space, because we don't know what other rights are going to follow next. And it's a very slippery slope. Equal protection is important, and prohibiting gender discrimination is important.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa.
And we're being discriminated against. Make no means about it.
That's true. Thank you. Jamie, what are some thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with, and some actionable information?
Yeah, and I saw a chat or something, a open question from Eliza about Roe was always a compromise for reproductive rights. Are any states post-race expanding the right to abortion? And that was one thing I just like to leave with, is that we're in this crisis moment, and Roe was the floor, it was not the ceiling. And the only kind of positive, or I guess silver lining, ray of hope, whatever phrase you want to say, about being in this really bad situation, is that we can reimagine what the future looks like, and we don't have to settle for how things have been. So I think as we think about fighting back for our rights, and as Lisa's talked about the ERA and, really having something that addresses gender discrimination, we can imagine a future where women and, all people who can become pregnant have access to the full reproductive rights, no matter their zip code, no matter their immigration status, no matter their income, and that we're really building, thinking about healthcare holistically and reproductive healthcare holistically. So I think that's something that gives me hope is, knowing we're at the bottom, but that we can really build back up where we want to be. And I think to do that, it's going to take, advocacy for years, but starting with making sure we turn things around electorally. And so I've also seen comments around supporting Congresswomen Spanberger, Wexton, and Loria. And that's so important. At Planned Parenthood, we're also very closely watching the races in North Carolina, because in North Carolina, they have a supportive governor, but they have a very gerrymandered state legislature where if a few seats are lost in the state House and state Senate, the legislature could then override the governor's veto. And so they could have an abortion ban if the elections don't go the right way this November. So really following and helping, trying to help out some there as well, in addition to making sure we protect these congressional seats in Virginia, because if our neighbors lose access, then it's also going to mean people needing to travel further for care. And that's also going to impact Virginians' access, because if we have more people traveling from out of state, it's going to be harder for Virginians to be able to access care as well. So I think, one, being hopeful about how we can make things better, but also making sure that we're putting in that electoral work, that we're knocking on the doors and making the phone calls and doing that hard work, so that we have the champions who will fight for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. Senator?
Thank you. I'll just follow up on what Jamie just said. November 8th, we are going to have an election at the federal level. The polls are incredibly tight. These are newly redistricted districts. So Abigail Spanberger, Elaine Luria, and Jennifer Wexton, specifically in Virginia, need our help. They need you to knock doors. They need you to make phone calls. They need you to make donations. This is going to go, especially the two outside of Northern Virginia are going to be won or lost by a hairline. And I lost my first race by 32 votes. I don't want to wake up on the 9th and see us having lost the majority in Congress. We've got to do everything we can to preserve the majorities in Congress today through early November. And then we got to get right back out there and work on 2023s. But I thank everybody for their interest in all the work that you do. I know that this is a crowd that is very acquainted with the work that we do electorally. And I just want to thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So I am going to go ahead and wrap up. Nora, I'm not sure if you want to come back on and give us any closing remarks, but thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much, Senator Boysko, and you struggling with your throat. Thank you for this time. We don't take that for granted. Thank you, Jamie, for coming to us and providing your insight from Planned Parenthood advocates. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming and sharing your thoughts with us from Virginia Now. This is super important. I just hope that if everyone who's listening in, if there's nothing else, please understand that your vote is super important. You have to get out and vote November 8th. There's information, discuss it with your friends and your family, and understand that even if it doesn't necessarily affect you, it affects someone you know. This is really, really important. Go ahead, Nora.
Yeah, I just wanted to second that. And thank you, Deborah, for being a great moderator. And also to Senator Boysko and Jamie and Lisa. We really appreciate you coming on. Again, for the the audience and everyone else, this was being recorded and still is, and will be available on the FCDC website and I believe on our Facebook page as well. And I just want to add that I work in campaigns for a living, and I know how how on edge people are about messaging a lot of the times. And I'm so glad to see us really leaning in as Democrats and just as citizens into abortion rights as just a fundamental issue. And I think it's very brave, but also it feels really good. And so, yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone again. And yeah, good luck for the next couple of days and years. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nora.
And we do
Okay.
have to vote like our lives depend on it in every single election. Not
Every
just
election is
wait for
important.
abortion to, row to fall.
You're right. Every single election is important. This is about saving women's lives, saving people's lives, making sure that people don't feel like they have to decide between life and death when it comes to a freedom they should be that they're born with. Diane Burns says thank you so much. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes of your evening back to you, as it is 8:27. Thank you again for your time. Have a wonderful evening.